I'm Bryce Futch,
I'm Spencer Amaral.
and this is The Way Forward. All right, everybody, welcome back to a new episode of the Way Forward podcast. Bryce Futch here with Spencer Amaral. This is a holiday edition, and we say holiday not to talk down to Christmas, which is one of the greatest holidays of all. It happens to be I believe it's safe to say it's our favorite holiday
Of
based
course.
off the naming of the church.
Absolutely.
But holiday edition, because we're going to talk about what is the purpose of holidays for a culture. Why are they good? Why do they matter? Why is it something that everyone should celebrate, even if they're not necessarily religious? So we're going to dive into that today. Spencer, first question to you. Tell us about holidays. Why do they matter?
Yeah. Well, hey, Bryce, great to be with you again. I love this topic, very close to the life and the rhythms of the church. But I guess to start off, go back all the way to the beginning. When God creates the world, he creates time. This is a world that's in time. And the way that he portions time, you find on page 1 of the Bible, you've got the week of 7 days. 6 days are there to work, 1 day is there to rest. And when God designs life, he has this rhythm built into it of work and rest. And there's a beauty in that's a sustainable pattern for us as humans, right? We're really glad that he gives us rest time. We need it. But there's also really important things that happen in the rest. And this is the place where we need to have more of these kinds of conversations in our culture because our culture's adopted this view of rest time as the unplug, veg out, amuse myself, which literally
Mm-hmm.
means, stop thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, and basically do nothing, as if we find rest and fulfillment in the nothingness, rather than an intentional approach to rest that honors God's design in the rhythm of work and rest, but also recognizes that God had purpose for the rest, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for holidays in our context to reflect that is really important. And it requires us to have more of these kinds of conversations. But in short, we say holiday. What does that word come from? Holy day. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the church saying this is a day worth marking, celebrating, and honoring by rearranging my time in order to focus on what is worth marking, noting, celebrating, honoring on this day. We do this every Sunday by pausing in our work and we say, on this day, the Lord of all creation, the God who preceded the existence of everything that we can see and touch and feel, he ordained that the seventh day of the week would be the day of rest. And so, I guess now it's the first day of the week now as we mark it. But
Sure.
aside
The
from
principle
that,
remains.
he calls us out of that monotony of work and he says, stop, take a beat, and regain perspective and find rest for your body and your soul
Mm-hmm.
and worship me so that you can, rather than be trapped in this worldly cycle, you can actually build a lifelong relationship with your creator. And so, anyway, these are all things that don't happen if you're just laser focused on work 7 days a week. And some people might feel like that's crazy. Who would want to work 7 days a week? And yet, I think we all know it is to, you get in the zone, you're accomplishing
Mm-hmm.
things, or you're driven by desperation. And I'm working on this project that I love, that I'm passionate about. It needs to happen. This is how I'm feeding my family. And it's not too hard to rationalize, a world where it's just work all the time until you
Mm-hmm.
drop. Like you work until you can't. I get
Right.
if
So
I'm
you burn
imagining
out.
an
And
alternate
then when
universe,
you burn out, then you take rest.
when you're weak, when you're too weak to keep going,
Right,
then
right,
you
right.
have to quit. And the biblical picture is far more purposeful in both the work and the rest, but it forces us to be flexible, forces us to be able to pivot. Just like it requires a healthy work-life balance to actually mark on the clock. It's 9 a.m. time to start working. That means it's
Mm-hmm.
time to stop sleeping, stop, distracting myself with social media or whatever else I wanted to be doing. Time to clock in. And then at 5 p.m., it's time to clock out and go spend time with my family
Right.
and cherish the other gifts that God's put in my life. And so there's balance and rhythm that's built into all these things because they're all good.
Hmm.
When we get out of that balance, that right balance, we take good things and turn them into idols, and we build a life
Yeah.
that's oriented around this central point that we are drawn to, and everything falls apart, ironically. We fall
Mm.
apart in body and soul. So
That's really fair.
holidays are super important for us to avoid that problem, to maintain a
Hmm.
right perspective of life, to mark and honor and observe the things in the year, whether it's historical events, whether it's saints of the past, whether it's the historical acts of God in time, to say this is a day where I'm going to take a time out and extract myself from all these other projects that I'm focused on, and I'm
Hmm.
going to defer my gaze to that which is laudable and praiseworthy.
I like it. I like it a lot. I think too, history of the word, like you talked about, holiday comes from holy day, and that is specifically within the English language. There was all united under the Church of England, right? And so there was this cultural Christianity, this cultural understanding of these holy days that mark the year. Only in the American context do we get the word vacation, and this is a nice little piece of trivia for the folks out there. Vacation was actually coined in the early 1900s during the Spanish flu because people were vacating New York City and they were going to the Adirondacks, which is where I lived for a period of time. There's a restaurant
Yeah, it's
that I
beautiful.
used to frequent, and they had a newspaper clipping underneath the glass at the checkout register that gave you the story of the where the term vacation came from.
No way.
Yeah, because people were leaving, they were vacating New York City to go to the Adirondacks
But
to
that makes
escape
perfect
Spanish flu.
sense.
Yep. So we use it as an escape as opposed to the traditional understanding of a rest and a recoup. I think too you made a really good point about the lack of understanding that the resting helps us be more effective with our work, right?
Yes.
You're much more effective as an individual, as a parent, as a husband, or as a worker if you're not totally saturated with whatever it is that you're doing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our bodies need that distance and that rest. I think too, another piece that you touched on was the idea that amusing ourselves is really going back to mindlessness and to nothing, right? But we, in our modern sense, have actually turned that mindlessness into a binging, a gluttonous of time suck. Whether that's, what do we do with TV shows today? We don't watch them when they come out on cable and wait for the commercials. We wait for the whole season to come out and then we binge watch it on Netflix at 3 in the morning, right? It's a terrible practice because we're not actually taking the time to separate ourselves out and to do the work of resting, right? Resting doesn't just mean getting rid of everything. It's being intentional with your time to do things that are good for you as a human and good for you as an individual, such as taking a walk with your kids, reading a book, listening to a nice piece of music, taking time to cook a nice meal. Like there are things that we do that are very helpful for us as individuals that we often miss or forget.
Yeah. That also reminds me of, sometimes we talk about the hierarchy of needs.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
a lot of that reflects your view of what a human being is. And so
Hmm.
I think a lot of these questions do go back to just reiterating what is a human being? Is it just a lump of flesh? And if that's all that we are, flesh and blood robots, then you just need to take care of the physical needs. And, make
It's
sure
an
you
economic it's an economic animal, right?
throw enough food at me that I can live, and that's all, my
Hmm.
I will require. But we all know that we're driven, and what really sets us apart as humans is that we're driven to pursue these higher goods. And in fact,
Hmm.
the good, right? We're always orienting ourselves in pursuit of some good. Aristotle starts off his ethics with this basic premise: all
Yep.
human action is oriented towards some good. And that's distinctly human. It speaks to the presence of a soul that perceives the good in the universe and in the world around us, and that we can actually draw nearer to the goods through certain things, whether that's
Hmm.
justice in the, social sense, or it's the caring for the poor, or it's the love of a family, or if it's the beauty of friendship, or the delight in a good meal. These things are all good, and they're
Yeah.
gifts from God, and we observe them as good. So, going back to the hierarchy of needs, if a human being is a soul, as well as a body and soul,
Hmm.
then we ought to be very careful to care for our soul. This reminds me of a Chris Pratt talk. I saw he was given some remark at a award show.
Yeah, I remember
He was
this.
given
Hmm.
an award, and he said something. It wasn't. He tried to keep it pretty vague. It wasn't just a gospel presentation, but he
Hmm.
made a real point to say, "You have a soul. You should take care of it. So pray."
Hmm.
Right? And like that alone, I think that was pretty shocking that an actor would say something like that, which is sad. And he was talking to youth, I also believe. So,
Hmm.
but like this should be common knowledge, and beyond common knowledge, it should be something that we all acknowledge is critical to a healthy human life. In order for our
Hmm.
people, our kids to flourish, they just need to live their life in recognition that they do have a soul. Um,
Right.
and you better care for that. And that also goes back into the rest part of the week and the
Hmm.
time that we detach from working with our hands, putting food on the table, or even education and, pouring books into our minds, but caring for the soul as well is it's a distinct thing that requires its
Hmm.
own set of practices. Holidays are really designed to fit into that bucket as well, right? Yes, you need a
Yes.
vacation, not in the Spanish flu sense, but you need some time off to rest your body. Absolutely. You need a break from school to rest your mind, but your soul needs some time for you to invest in it, and to cultivate nearness with God. So holidays are meant to give us time to do exactly that. And when we mark the holiday well, it accomplishes all these things which are so good for our body, our mind, our soul. They also bring us together in a deeper
Hmm.
community. And you have all the great cultural traditions that go along with the holidays, especially Christmas. Um, it's funny when you turn on a Hallmark Christmas movie, this is what they're always emphasizing. They're not emphasizing that this is all about Jesus and Jesus is the reason for the season, but they're emphasizing that A, this is a sacred season of sorts. You ought to observe it. Go back home to your small hometown, right? And spend
Hmm.
Christmas with the family. And it also stresses that it's these times and the traditions and the cultural institutions within this season that really shape lives and families, and those are the memories that we cherish for a lifetime. And they're so good.
Yes, absolutely. I'm trying to find an article that I saw that I think ties it with that, and it was about tobacco use, and it was the different types of tobacco and how they paralleled our human life, and so it was comparing cigars, cigarettes, and Zins. I think we're the three. But it was I think it had to do with the appetites, but it was a really good comparison about our kind of consumerism and our desire and our draws, right? And what are we using things for? And are we using things for their right, for their in a right ordered manner? Like, for example, are we being creative because it's a gift from God and we're doing it because we're in His image, or are we doing it because we're trying to find a get rich quick scheme because we're lazy and we're not wanting to work for our money, right? Like, there's a misordering of our humanity that if we don't pay attention to and we don't stay aware of, we can fall into those traps pretty quickly. And so then we end up kind of like we've been talking about so far. We end up using the holiday instead of an opportunity to refocus ourselves as a way to just try and escape and get away and flee and not actually do any work on ourselves and on our soul that the resting often necessitates.
Right.
So let's kind of shift and talk more about now why holidays are good for nations, for states, for cultures. Why are national holidays a big deal, right? Kind of, I think, historically looking at America, we've had this cultural Christianity that's been under the surface for a long time. That's either that so you'd say, well, I'm not a Christian, but I go to church on Easter and Christmas, right? Like that was kind of the social norm, or I might consider myself a Christian because I go to church on Easter and Christmas, right? There's kind of two sides of that coin. We used to have kind of a cultural understanding of these underlying stories of who Jesus was, of these biblical parables, biblical parallels to society and to culture, things that we could, a politician would use in a speech. They would talk about Moses or Noah or Jonah or somebody like that, and everyone in the crowd would know who they mean and what they're talking about, even if they didn't consider themselves a Christian, even if they didn't continue to go to church, because that Christian story and the American story were so connected, right? And so the reason we just finished celebrating Thanksgiving, we have a Thanksgiving Day because of George Washington's Thanksgiving Proclamation, where the President of the United States basically said it is a good thing for us to stop and thank God for what he has done for us as a country. And if you haven't read the Thanksgiving Day Proclamation, I highly encourage you to go read it. It's an incredible piece of work.
Yes.
Body of work. Piece of work sounds negative. Body of work from our first president, and set a great standard there. So
Who was
maybe
an
talk a little bit.
Anglican?
Wesleyan,
The
yes.
great American Anglican, George Washington.
The Anglican Church is America's church. I mean, I'm just saying.
I know. Well, I mean,
Uh,
all those Virginia guys, because it was the state
right.
church.
Yeah.
But he was a vestryman as well. He's very invested in his local church. But not to derail you.
No, no, that's fine. So let's talk about why these things are a good. Why is it that holidays are a good way for us to unite as a society?
Well, yeah, it's a good segue. Picking up on the point I was just making about the Hallmark Christmas thing. Like
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
these fibers that connect us with the people around us, whether it's that tradition of making cookies with grandma, the week before Christmas, or cutting down a tree with your dad
Hmm.
the Saturday after Thanksgiving, or decorating the tree and putting the star on top with mom. All of those things that we do them repeatedly, we do them with joy. It's part of a larger celebration of something bigger than us that lifts all of our collective gaze higher above
Hmm.
the drama and the desperation and the brokenness of this world and the messiness of this world. And we lift our gaze up to see a God who loves us enough to give the world the gift of his son, to take on our flesh and live among us and proclaim the good news of God's love and grace to mankind and his willingness to come and be our king, right? And to
Hmm.
welcome us back into his kingdom. And so it's all so good, so uplifting, so hopeful, so joyful. We need that as people. We need that desperately. And the fact that it brings us together, we also need that. Like, you just look at
Yeah.
America, the more post-Christian it becomes, people don't grow more connected and more deeply involved in community. It's the opposite. We stagnate in our
Hmm.
relationships, we grow apart, and without a real spiritual heartbeat, that reflects the gospel and an awareness that though man is imperfect and fallen, God still loves us and he still chose to save us and he sent his son into the world to die for us. That continually calls us back to the possibility of us finding a second chance and us being forgiven, right?
Hmm.
With God and coming back to relationship with him. And then it also inclines us to be willing to forgive our neighbor, to forgive those who trespass against us, right?
Hmm.
For if we've been shown forgiveness from God, who are we to withhold that from our fellow man? So those kinds of things, I think it's that spiritual aspect of grace in our lives that it enables people to function together in community. When you don't have that gospel heart behind it, or a sense of God's love for the world despite the world's brokenness, people drift apart from one another. And you see this in American families, you see it in American communities, and it goes along with the decline in observing these traditional institutions of holidays and holiday
Hmm.
traditions. Because if we're going to do these things, nobody does it alone. How many people are going to go out
Right.
and cut down a tree alone so that they can put it in their apartment where they
Hmm.
enjoy it alone, right?
With their cat.
And maybe you do that a couple times for the heck of it, but is anyone really living an isolated life and observing all of these things for 60 years?
Hmm. No.
Yeah. That's
And
not
if they are, they don't want to be. And if they say they want to be, they're lying to themselves, because it goes against the way humans are created. It goes against the way humans are wired, right? Humans are created and wired for community.
exactly. Either you wish there was someone there to enjoy all these things with you, or
Mm-hmm.
you just let go of it all and you say, what's
Mm-hmm.
the point? Why
Yeah.
go through all this hassle? It's not like why make a 20-pound turkey on Thanksgiving? I don't have
Mm-hmm.
any family that I talk to. None of them are going to come over. Why would I make that big turkey?
Right.
Right? So we just end
Yeah.
up letting go of the things that shaped our childhood. We have all these
Mm-hmm.
memories of. And when you lose that, and then there's a generational gap and there's a discontinuity in the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
It shapes culture and it shapes society and people very deeply, more deeply than we realize. And in some ways, these things aren't fully realized for decades and generations until look at like church going in America. We tend to talk about this like, oh, there's a new poll out, and people suddenly last year started making different decisions about whether they go to church or not. And that's really not how it works. Um,
Mm-hmm.
to make greater sense of this, you go back generations and you look at like the greatest generation and how the country dealt with the Depression and the World Wars by going back to church. And then you had the generation after that, which was marked with the fear of the Cold War and the Vietnam War
Mm-hmm.
and all the social unrest. And you see people turning away from all of life's institutions, all of the nation's institutions, including the churches. And
Mm-hmm.
then you go forward a generation and you do get like the Jesus movement and stuff like that, but all of this is an experiment now in what you get when what do the kids that once upon a time were forced to go to church when they were little and then they chose to stop going and now they
Right.
grow up and they have kids and they're very hands off with their kids, or maybe a few of them became born again Christians, right? But what does that look like? What is their kids experience of life in the church going to look like, and how are their kids going to look after that? And so you definitely see the carryover across the
Mm-hmm.
generations when you can look at it in the context of history. The institution matters, right?
Right.
In a
Absolutely.
society, especially a society like ours. So all these traditions and institutions are so important and worth fighting for and redeeming because they serve important purposes,
Mm-hmm.
which is why we have holy days. Holidays that we
Right.
set aside because certain things are worth
Right.
marking and remembering and honoring. Now, on the flip side of this, and you alluded to this, I've been stressing a lot about how a holiday rightly understood is all about understanding that this thing is worthy of my time and attention. It's worth me going back and reading George Washington's Thanksgiving address, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is
Right.
this is good. It's hearkening me towards
Yeah.
something that is good and true. It's worth me studying the accounts of Medal of Honor winners on the anniversary of D-Day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or when we get to Memorial Day. And that's just on the historic side, never mind the church side and studying the lives of the saints that we honor, like St. Andrew's Day, we
Yeah.
just celebrated. So you, I really think it's important to remember that the holiday has a purpose. Just like
Yeah.
at the beginning, God created the Sabbath day of rest for a purpose. A culture that disconnects from the purpose of these days just stagnates into mindless amusement, like you talked about. And that means we're not
Mm-hmm.
caring for our soul. But
Right.
it gets worse. It just degenerates because we still want distraction and fun, and you just get circuses.
Mm-hmm.
And the
It's
circuses
all
happen because we are so seducible, we're corruptible, we're
right.
prone to being seduced by that little voice that says, why go to work today? You deserve another day
Mm-hmm.
off. Why do the hard thing? Why work to take care of somebody else? We
Right.
could just, distract ourselves a little longer. Or even like, I'm at work, but why do the work when I can just
Mm-hmm.
log on to social media?
Yeah. There's a story probably 6 or 7 years ago now when the work from home thing just started to be a thing. And this guy had three full time jobs, and none of his employers knew that he had any of the other jobs. But he found that he was able to complete the work that each of them gave in approximately, like, I think it was like 12 hours. So he would work like three 12-hour days for each of these guys and then basically just make up stuff that he was doing on the other days. And he was making like 150 grand a year. and it's a laziness that sets in, right? That says I don't owe anyone else anything. I'm just here for me, right? So like if you I'm guilty of this with holidays here at our house, right? Like we just had a Thanksgiving celebration, had a bunch of family over. We had a wonderful time. But we probably should have read the Thanksgiving Declaration like as a group, right? Like take a second and actually reorient and say, Thanksgiving is not just about being thankful for what we have. It's also a look back at the faithfulness of God to us as a people over time, right? It's not just here and now. We are connected metaphysically with the past, right? And I think that's also really important for us as Americans. We toe a very fine line, right? Because we're religiously plural as a society, but we also have very clear Judeo-Christian basics and roots. So there's nothing un-American about going around saying Merry Christmas to everybody, right? That doesn't discount the Jew who's celebrating Hanukkah, right? And it doesn't mean
Of
that you
course not.
don't, right? And it doesn't mean that you, in order to acknowledge Easter, that you have to totally disavow the Easter bunny if you don't believe in Jesus, right? Like there are things that there are ways that we can come together as a society, and it's very important that we continue to do that. And even around our national holidays, right? 4th of July, Memorial Day, Veterans Day. Like Veterans Day and Memorial Day have basically overlapped with each other now, right? Memorial Day is to celebrate those who died in combat. That's what Memorial Day is for. Veterans Day is to recognize people who served and who survived. Those are two distinct groups, right? With two distinct purposes and reasons for honoring each of those, right? That's the phrase all gave
Right.
some gave all.
Yep.
But we as a society don't do the work of differentiating, right? We don't say this is important, that these distinctions matter, right? Like we have become a society where there are no distinctions in anything. There's no distinctions between man and woman. There's no distinction between events. There's no distinctions between time, right? It's all here and now and about me and what I want.
Yes, and the core of that is a cultural nihilism that just says, look, life is random. It's all a lump of clay. If it's going to have any meaning, it's because you're going to impose yourself and your will and your desires upon it and produce
Right.
something that serves you,
Yeah.
which is uh, the a deadly way to look at the world and to live your life.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if we talked about it on here or not, but on a recording, but I know that I've talked to several people about how big of a bullet we dodged as Americans with Donald Trump being reelected as president for the 250th anniversary of our founding, right? Can you imagine if Kamala Harris was president during the 250th anniversary? It would be an apology tour, right? As opposed to here is what makes America great, right? Here is our story. Here is our history. Now, does this mean that our history doesn't have problems? No. Does it mean that we just forget and write off all of the wrong things America's ever done? No. But we don't wallow in it, right? We don't own that and wear it on our forehead and say, "Oh, woe is me. We're totally debased as a society. We have no future. We have no good." Right? We can say, "Look, we really messed up, and there's some stuff that we need to acknowledge, but we also need to celebrate the things that we did right."
Right.
You know, we have made huge strides as a country. We've helped end world hunger. We've helped end or protect peace and democracy overseas in the First and Second World War, right? We fought a war over slavery and we won, right? Like we have these significant historical wins where America did the right thing, prospered, made the world better and safer, and we ought to celebrate that.
Yeah, we it I think the theme of the 250th anniversary should be basically Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. You know, the reason why that stands
Mm-hmm.
out, as brief as it is because it's timeless
Yeah.
and it presents a an appreciation for those who came before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, any celebration of the good things that America's done can never be a pat on our own backs. We didn't do any of those
Right.
things. I didn't
Right.
storm Omaha Beach.
Right.
I wasn't there at Pickett's Charge, but when others that came before us sacrificed everything and
Mm-hmm.
fought the good fight, for us to live our lives in a way that doesn't even take note of that and doesn't
Mm-hmm.
live a life that reciprocates gratitude and honor, I mean, woe to us. Any
Right.
nation that, especially with our history, as short as our history is, and as
Oh
much
yeah.
cool stuff as we have to observe within it, for us to fail, like that is such a flaw of character and such a failure of our soul as a nation to fail to recognize how blessed we are.
Mm-hmm.
That it would be it would clearly signal the end, right, of civilization, at least our little role in it. And it would also be a huge failure spiritually. We have to
Right.
be capable of honoring the good and rejecting the bad. That's really
Hmm.
like what do we talk about with human wisdom, a life well lived? Cling to the good,
Right.
reject the bad, learn from your mistakes, get back up, keep fighting, look out for those around you,
Hmm.
protect the helpless, et cetera, et cetera. All of this goes into how we interact with the people around us and the generations that came before us. So
Right.
if we do this well, what you want to have is a grateful society that's grateful for its genuine blessings. Yes, a society that is willing to identify injustice when they see it and resist it,
Hmm.
right? And those two things sometimes they're opposed falsely to one another. Like, for us to be a grateful nation that appreciates its liberties means we become a nation of bootlickers and spineless,
Hmm.
sycophants. And like, no, no, for us to be a Christian nation, a godly nation means we're grateful and we give thanks intentionally and purposefully for all of God's many blessings to us. And we sign up to continue in the fight, right?
Hmm.
In the work that was done by the people before us. So Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address, he's like, "Hey, okay, are we just going to show up at this? It's the opening of the funeral where all these guys who died at Gettysburg are buried, right? He's like, are we just here to say
Right.
pretty things?" And he's kind of making a point that because the guy who spoke before him spoke for a long, like 45 minutes or something,
Hmm.
maybe an hour and a half, and it was all about the speech and the spectacle and the show. And Lincoln makes this point, like this day is not really about us putting on a show, because in doing that
Right.
we're only really patting ourselves on the back. What we ought to do, if we really mean everything we're saying, we really appreciate these guys who are now 6 feet under, we need to appreciate why they died, and we need to understand why it was worth fighting for, and we
Hmm.
need to therefore pick up a gun ourselves and get into the fight. The fight is not
Right.
over. And there's no better way to think about the American experiment as a continual journey towards liberty in all its
Hmm.
blessings and its true truest expression, right? Not liberty abused, not libertinism, not a self-serving nation of
Hmm.
ingrateful, disconnected, autonomous, flesh and blood robots, right?
Hmm. Right.
Which seems like what we're willing to settle for today, but rather a nation of people who are grateful to God and willing to steward their liberty intentionally and very carefully. And that requires so much work and so much willingness to fight every day against the world, the flesh, and the devil.
Hmm. That's really good. I think we'll leave it there for today. We're already in holiday mode, as it were, so we'll go a little shorter than normal. You guys probably won't hear from us again until the new year, as we take time to celebrate our families and all of that good stuff, and rest and reorient. But
Yes.
uh, yeah, appreciate the time today. Quick side note: we are gaining in popularity. Believe it or not, people actually enjoy listening to this.
How did
We
that
just
happen?
we I don't know, but we just crossed 1,000 downloads just a couple days ago. So that's pretty cool. We appreciate
You're doing
the
great work,
support.
Bryce.
Well, likewise, Spencer. I'd only be half as good without you here. Maybe you have, but yeah, keep sharing. Please spread the word about us. We appreciate the support and the time, and we hope you all have a Merry Christmas and a
Merry
Happy
Christmas.
Holidays. Merry Christmas. We want to take a second and say thank you to our sponsor, Stand for Georgia Values. They are pro family, pro business, pro public safety pack based out of Cherokee County, Georgia, and they're the reason that we get to continue to bring you regular content. So we're very thankful for their support. You can find out more about them at gavalues.org. They're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Please make sure and go give them a like and a follow. We're incredibly thankful to have their support.